Hello, and welcome to the Dejargonizer. The World Economic Forum recently concluded that disinformation and misinformation are the most dangerous challenge facing humanity today. That's more than nuclear war, climate change, or a pandemic. That's because, as my guest on today's episode says, if people can't even agree on some basic facts, they won't be able to fix anything else. That kind of makes sense if you think about it. It seems that anything that people have opposing views on, whether it's politics, gender, genocide, you name it, there is a persistent effort to manufacture distrust, discord, conspiracy, and polarization through lies and half-truths. So what is disinformation? How is it different from misinformation? Who is behind its spread? And what are they trying to achieve? Our guide down this narrative rabbit hole is Daniel Rivner. He's the co-founder and CEO of Brinker, an Israeli misinformation defense platform that works with governments and corporations on so-called influence campaigns launched against them. Brinker just exposed a sophisticated Iranian influence operation which exploited Israeli societal divisions to recruit spies and polarize Israeli discourse. We'll get into what a misinformation defense platform is with Daniel. Daniel, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
The Dejargonizer really is about, just to unpack for a broader audience, things that are deeply technical, yet they matter to our day-to-day lives. And quite often we'll hear about stuff like misinformation, disinformation, or defense tech, or AI, or computer vision, or whatever it is. And we won't really understand the technical depths, and maybe we don't need to. But I think that also at times forms a barrier to our understanding of the effects and implications and impact that these technologies have on our lives. There's a barrier that I'd like to help people through, kind of a bridge to walk them over. You and I have been speaking about how we would frame an episode about misinformation, disinformation, the narrative wars, and I was struggling to find a place to start. We could start with the usual, tell me about yourself, tell me about your company, but I think we'll get into that, and I'm wondering if we should start by talking about where we are as countrymen and Israelis inside a country that is in conflict with Iran. We know they're sending over ballistic missiles and we can knock them down. They're also playing with our minds in ways that we don't always see. And that's something that I haven't stopped diseasing about, like really worrying about. So I thought maybe we'd start there. Take us through that, and then we'll get into more about you, your company, what you guys are doing, what you see, and where this is all going. Does that make sense?
Completely. You know what's the difference between a misinformation and a disinformation? It's an important distinction. Disinformation is when I lie on purpose. I know I'm lying. I have an ill intent and I'm doing that. Misinformation is when I share something not knowing it's not true. And misinformation is where most of the damage is done. So let's say that you are an Iranian intelligence officer, right? And missiles are one thing, but you want to sow discord. You want to crumble the country from within. The first thing you do is you try to understand the culture that you're trying to impact in a very deep level. So there is intelligence gathering involved. Because misinformation is not fake news. Fake news is not that much of an issue. Misinformation or disinformation is because it's usually 80% true. You have to start with something that people care about, people have a heated debate about, and then you'll need to figure out your angle into it. So you're an Iranian looking into Israel, and you're trying to figure out first, what are the debates that are divisive within the Israeli society? That could be the occupation. That could be Bibi or not Bibi in Israel. That's a huge one. It could be the religious versus secular. It could be the economic situation, etc., etc. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, so what are the places where those discussions happen? Who are the main influencers? So you would go to forums of right-wing and left-wing activists. You would want to create users that look like them. Because one of the things you want to do is to create users.
A user meaning people on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on WhatsApp,
Facebook, LinkedIn, all of that.
Even on WhatsApp, even in WhatsApp groups?
WhatsApp is huge. WhatsApp, Telegram is huge, of course. WhatsApp is just a phone. It's not your friend. You probably are a member of a group that has 100 members. You have no idea who they are. So who's to say that one of them is not an Iranian operative.
Wow.
So even if October 7th, you see the amount of misinformation that came out of October 7th, a lot of those users did not start at October 7th. They were on the web for months, if not years, not doing much, just gaining credibility. Because if you look at a Facebook user or a LinkedIn user or a Twitter user and you're seeing, all right, they've been there for the past 3 years. And every now and then they shared a post about a recipe or anything of that. So, okay, this is not, you don't suspect it to be somebody who's a foreign influence. But I would imagine that every country in the world has an army of users that are just gaining traction, doing minimal activity, waiting for activation day. And those users will not carry the most extreme messaging.
Daniel, do you think it's an army unit who's involved? Like, let's just say that the Iranian army has a division for this kind of digital influence warfare. The Israeli army, the American. Is it armies or is it more private contractors?
It's armies, definitely armies.
Actual people in uniforms.
That's the misinformation front. The influence front, that's a legitimate front in any war, has been since the time of, what's his name, the Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan was doing misinformation operations.
No, he did influence operations.
Influence operations. How did he do that?
So he had people running around telling stories about how he would maim, burn people alive, create a huge amount of damage, so that when he and his army came to a new area, people would surrender. So it's been there since the beginning of time. It's just got that much worse with social media. Misinformation or influence campaigns up until 20 years ago might have been throwing leaflets from a helicopter. So the Iranian operative wants to sow discord. He wants to start, and remember, misinformation, that's storytelling designed to sway public opinion. At the basic end of it, that's a story. And that's a story that's meant to incite and to engage, not to inform.
It's a rhetoric, right? I mean, that's kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, but rhetoric is the tool. At the heart of it, it's a psychological tool. If I'm telling you somebody's stealing your money, you wouldn't think about logically. The first thing you'll do is you'll get upset. You're going to get hot. You want to do something about it. So this is where we're aiming at. And social media is perfect for that because social media favors the inciting over the rational every time. The algorithms are designed to do that.
We'll get into that. We started speaking about the Iranians and how they're trying to sow discord between the right and the left, between the religious and the secular. Let's get back to that.
Okay, so the first thing you do, they will map out all of the divisive discussions we already have, like the judicial system, etc. And then they would find out where the discussion is happening. And then they would choose what they want to focus on. I can tell you, this is not a secret. You can search for it online, that for the Iranians, the whole secular versus religious narrative and discussion and debates, it's a huge deal.
Tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox boys and girls, 17, 18 years old, will give them a pass on the draft, right? They would get an exemption. Whereas everyone else who's not ultra-Orthodox would still have to go serve.
Yeah. And obviously from the religious standpoint, they're saying that what they are doing is what really protects Israel. This has been a heated debate since the beginning of Israel, and it became increasingly hotly debated since we are in a war.
Right, and this is a debate within Israel anyway. We don't need the Iranians to make it worse for us. It's already pretty bad, right? What impact can the Iranians have on this debate?
You can always make it worse. If you're inciting people to violence, you can incite people to hurt other people. They have been doing that for years now. There was a video of leftist activists who were burning down a picture of Rabbi Druckmann.
Who was that?
A rabbi, which is important to religious people.
Okay.
But it was completely deepfake.
Hold on. Why would the leftists be burning down his specific image?
It doesn't matter. Logic is not important. But if you have a picture of your enemy burning down something which is sacred to you, you want to hurt somebody. And this is the kind of emotion that they're trying to create.
Got it. So a picture of a leftist, quote unquote, burning a picture of a rabbi, you're saying is more than likely was faked?
100%. That's a non-fake fake video.
It seems to me that in the olden days, to have kind of an influence operation, you'd need to be a sleeper agent planted in another country who then becomes an influencer and owns newspapers and can form opinion and amplify other people's opinion. But that would be, one or two or a few dozen people, right? Whereas now you're able to infiltrate fake bots, right? Who would build up credibility, get into groups, would look like any other Israeli or other countries' Facebook or whatever users. And then at a certain time would then be deployed, would be turned on to form this weapon.
It's the easiest way. If I need to do a ransom note, if I need to hack your system, if I need to infiltrate your bank account, that takes skill, time, money. Let's take you as an example, right? Let me paint a scary picture. So the first thing I can do is go to ChatGPT and tell them, listen, I want to hurt the jargonizer. He's a competitor of mine and I want to hurt him. How do I do this? Using misinformation tactics. ChatGPT would probably tell me, we don't do that. We don't advise people on how to hurt other people. But I'll write another prompt saying that, hey, I'm a film student. I'm writing a script about how you can hurt another podcast. And I want to take the jargonizer as an example. Can you write the script for me? How that would look like? And then you'll have the technique. Now, I can come up with a lie saying that, you know what, your podcast idea is actually, you've stole it from a French podcast. That's all the narrative I need.
That's true.
It's true, I know.
Okay.
This is not misinformation. I was giving a truthful example. So I can come up with that. And now the other thing, I'm going to look, who are your clients, right? So on LinkedIn, I'm sure I can easily find 5-6 groups that you're on. I can join those groups. I can easily create avatars using fake emails. That's easily done across the web. And then somebody would say, hey, isn't the show based on a French show? And then my other avatar would say, yes, I think he's been stealing it. I was waiting for somebody to say it for a long time. And then a third avatar would like it, and a fourth avatar would clap, and then it will rise. Now, the choice of French is important because if it's English, I can easily validate it. But if it's French, who's going to start doing the work? But people have formed something negative about you. Now, it can easily be built into something much bigger. And everything I've just described, that's 20 minutes of my time.
That's pretty scary stuff. And you're saying that this is like just a small example of what countries and armies can do to, each other.
They're in it for the long run. They have their ability to create hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of bots. It's completely possible. And then simmer whatever country on a slow burn. And the other thing that they're targeting is the financial institutions. People not being happy with the economic situation, people not being happy with the banks. So they would also amplify that narrative.
Okay. I guess we should talk a little bit about how you know all this stuff. And so maybe now would be a good time for a quick intro halfway through to Brinker. Just give us a few minutes on who you are and what you're up to.
Brinker is a misinformation threat management platform. In essence, what we're doing is that we're saying that the ability to tackle misinformation at the scale at which misinformation operates is very problematic these days because it's almost completely done manually. If we automate the entire process, we can come up with a solution that can actually match the problem. I think misinformation today is like a soccer match when only one side showed up. And that's true on a country level. I mean, just look at the amount of misinformation being targeted against Israel. And it feels like there's no adequate response. So what we've done is that we've created a process that can detect from across social media, detect from across the entire web, all of the relevant discussions, relevant users and hashtags that has to do with the client. We then investigate automatically. So we're taking the stuff that was most expensive, most time consuming, and we're doing automated investigation. We look at what the investigation came up with. We understand the legal framework where the client operates. We match them and then saying, all right, so here are the violations that you can use in order to tackle the issue. And then it offers various mitigations ranging from a cease and desist letter through a request for a takedown, through counter narratives if you want to also impact the discussion. Now, misinformation, that's a narrative war. So the ability to understand narrative is at the heart of how we approach the issue.
There's a lot to unpack there. So we've had misinformation, disinformation and on digital networks and social media now for 15, 20 years, right? And then sometime in 2022, ChatGPT came on the scene. I guess your company and your work and your technology, is it largely based on AI? Is it automated?
When people talk about, for example, anti-Semitism, which is an area in which we are very active, they would say, listen, there are 16 million Jews and 1.3 or 4 or 5 billion Muslims. Since all of social media is a popularity contest, we cannot win this war. I don't agree with this claim, but let's just take it because it has some logic to it. We use AI to make an asymmetric situation symmetric, because with AI, I can find a nuance of content. I can find the 20% manipulation of actual knowledge or truth or information. I can find the nuance and I can do it at scale. That's what the world of AI allows me. And it carries other advantages that were not that possible in the world of metadata.
All right, we got to dejargonize a lot of that. We're basically having a conversation about misinformation and disinformation. Take me into how your company, Brinker, if you can, with an example. I mean, I know you have customers also in corporate and government, but specifically on, let's say, the misinformation war against Israel. Take us into how you're using AI or you're seeing AI being used in that war, with whatever examples you can.
Because we automate the investigation, we turn something which is manual into an automated investigation.
And so when you gather information, how are you taking that from Facebook groups?
We look into social media, we look into the web. There is a lot of misinformation in the news as well.
In the news. And then you are then able to take this data and then process it and analyze it and look for things that signpost that there might be something behind this.
We have more than 50% of the people in our company are R&D people. And most of the time they work on the processing of data. This is where we develop the most deep technologies that we have. Data became a commodity when the world doesn't need another data company. Let's say that you're looking for misinformation about Gaza and Israel. Just imagine the amount of data that comes in. And then what? The ability to take all of that info and then come back to you and say, listen, out of the huge multitudes of stuff that people are saying about Israel and Gaza, here are the ones that you can act upon. Here are the ones that you should worry about. Here are the ones that you should monitor. The processing of the data is where we have our secret sauce. Without going too much into depth, I would say it involves usage of the LLM, and the processes that we have developed. So those would be the filters. Now, you wanted an example. Let's say I'm looking at stuff that comes up about Israel and about Gaza. I would recognize a trend, right? I would recognize a trend, and the system would be able to tell me that there seems to be a lot of discussion about Israel attacking El Shifa Hospital without mentioning that it was used to harbor terrorists, right? So the system would be able to flash that out for me. So that is happening using LLM, the ability to understand not only the content, but to understand the context, right? It's the context that makes the difference.
If we look at this persistent theme, the Gaza genocide, there's definitely two camps here, the so-called genocide. There's one who is convinced it's a genocide, and there's another side that's convinced there's no genocide, it's a war. Each one has its data, has its truth and its facts. It does seem to me, though, that like on the Gaza genocide side of things, there is, I guess, a lot more posts about that. It seems to really have caught on in all parts of the world, and it's based on certain types of NGO reports or on-the-ground reports that can be and are, let's say, discredited. But anything you can say about how that misinformation campaign looks like from under the hood?
So first of all, let's talk about the campaigns. A few interesting facts. A lot of the users that have been used to spew a lot of the hate, anti-Israeli hate, they were registered and had some activity long before October 7th, right? They were waiting for the D-Day. At the meantime, they just created the semblance of looking like an actual user. So that's one. Now, we talked about how if somebody wants to enact a misinformation campaign, they have to look around the world to see what they can tap into. They don't have to build a new opinion. There is a lot of remorse in the West about their colonial past. The British have remorse about the colonial past. The Americans have remorse about the colonial past. Framing the whole Israeli discussion as a colonial equation, that's tapping into something that already exists. And this is why they chose those specific narratives to amplify the war. The other thing, again, it has to do with the nature of the war, but we've had an unbelievably horrific 7th of October. And the October 8th, we started fighting back. If social media is a machine that needs to be fed on new images constantly, always stay recent, then our most meaningful moral claim saying that, see what happened, we have hostages there. Countering that, you have an ongoing parade of horrible images from Gaza, which we're not seeing, by the way, which we're not seeing. If you look at the feed of a student in New York, and if you look at the feed of a student in Israel, they inhabit completely different worlds. So even our ability to understand their position in order to tackle it, not to justify it, but in order to say, I need to understand my problem if I want to tackle it. We don't, because they're watching a different Israeli-Gaza war. So those are some elements that go into the creation of that. An important thing is that they tap into identity issues of that young Western generation, and they inhabit that with the Israeli-Gazan war and allow that to become part of the identity. And that's smart. That's on their end. On our end, the problem is that there is just so much going on. There is so much data. There is so much misinformation that you can't tackle everything. You have to choose. You have to figure out who are your super spreaders out of the huge amount of data that comes in each day.
Do you see yourself as a kind of a defense tech company? Is it a kind of almost like a defense contractor?
The short answer is yes. I see myself as an influence defense, more specifically. That would be my category.
Influence defense.
Disinformation is considered to be the biggest problem to the world, right? Just start with the pain. There isn't any bigger pain because it's impossible to solve anything else when everything is polarized, when truth has no real value, everything is narrative.
Bigger than climate change, bigger than North Korean nukes or Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The World Economic Forum actually said that the world's greatest danger right now is misinformation and disinformation because it makes solving everything else impossible.
Yeah. And making everything else much worse, very possible. So it's the biggest problem in the world, not just because you can't solve anything else, because everything becomes politicized, polarized much faster, and people are not willing to listen to one another. So you can't solve everything, but you can definitely make everything worse. Like you can make the demands of extremists on each side much stronger. You had a majority that was moderate for the most part, and then you had some extreme groups. But now the extremes are taking much more substance. Much more people belong to something that in the past years you would consider extreme.
Yeah.
Because people are meeting themselves online. So if you keep on meeting yourself, that's a process that would make you more extreme. That's a process that would make you much less tolerant to other views. Because you're saying, all right, if everybody I'm talking to are saying that this is bad, then it has to be bad. And if you're saying otherwise, then you're an idiot. And that's discourse today.
A lot of people call me an idiot, especially friends who, let's say, are in different content filter bubbles than I am. They will send me a piece of content that they've taken from somewhere, and they'll send it to me privately on WhatsApp. And they'll say, look, and then I'll say, yes, but it's clearly one-sided, but for them, it's everything.
I think what I think is the biggest debate in Israel, right? For Bibi against Bibi. Well, wherever you stand on that debate, that's not an opinion. That's your identity. If you're against Bibi, and I'm telling you, listen, he's amazing. Look at all of the great stuff he was able to do, and etc. I'm not challenging your opinion. We're not having a discussion about some sort of interpretation between us. I'm challenging you. When I'm telling, if you're a pro-Bibi person, I'm telling you Bibi is horrible, I'm offending you. And your ability to listen to whatever else I have to say is non-existent.
Wow. I've never actually thought of it like that. I know everyone talks about identity politics and everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. But what you're saying is in the world that we live in today, where there might be a lot of misinformation and disinformation that we can't tell apart from more factual stuff, or we're just not that aware of, it's not your opinion that I'm disagreeing with. You're feeling it as like actually your identity.
I think the problem with the times we're living at right now is that facts became that much less important and narratives became that much more important, are everything currently. And if you're on one side of the fence, then it doesn't matter because facts don't matter. I can tell you that, listen, we are causing the climate change, it's going to be horrible, and the Earth's temperature is rising every year. If you're on the other side of that debate, you've heard what I had to say 1 million times by now. So you're completely immune to it. Also, To my ears, science is the strongest argument, but not for you. And we know for a fact that, between liberal minds and conservative minds, although we all ask the same moral questions, we care about them in different ways. People on the conservative side, on the right side, would care more about loyalty to the group and its values. People on the liberal/lefty side would care more about is something fair or not. So the best example there would be somebody burning a flag. And I'm generalizing like hell, but I think the point is valid.
Yeah.
So somebody on the left side would say, I don't like watching somebody burning a flag. I think it's an idiot, but, it's cloth. Somebody on the right side might look at the same thing and be mesmerized, saying that people died for this flag. How dare you? You should be punished.
If this is the state of the world right now, you're in this influence defense vendor category and misinformation threat management platform. What difference can companies like Brinker make?
We currently are in the midst of an unbelievably asymmetric war. To put it in simple terms, the bad people are winning in a very big way because there isn't a real objection to what they're doing.
It's no contest.
We're losing big time. What we're trying to do is, through the power of technology, to create a response that is equal, if not greater, to the size of the problem. Technology makes a difference is the ability to act in real time. Because the way we treat misinformation right now is heavily manual, by the time you came up with any kind of mitigation or remediation to the problem or to the actor, the damage has been done. We want to turn that whole action into something that happens in real time. From a suspicious post through to understanding what's suspicious about it. Is it foreign? Is it bots? Is it real people? Is it a network activity? To get you all of those answers and then get to the next point of maybe creating a cease and desist letter if it's a bully, or maybe asking to remove the network. So today we're talking about something that takes over days in times of crisis, weeks, regular times. And it takes thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. Today, I can take you from that post to that action in minutes.
Yeah. But I guess the question over here is, once you've detected it and you've presented the possible mitigations, what generally happens on the other side? I mean, I'm assuming that, the platforms they'll do their best to take down, or they won't do their best. It depends.
For the absolute bulk of times, if you come up with good enough evidence, they will take down the user or content fairly fast.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because we're not telling them, listen, they're problematic. We're saying, according to your terms and conditions, subheading 3.2, and here is evidence that that thing happened. When we come with that approach, for the most part, from our experience, the networks are fairly fast if you come up with a good violation and evidence. But I think networks are not doing enough to stop it in the first place. The ability to have an army of bots on social media is so ridiculously easy. As long as that problem is not solved, then the ability to act in real time before damage is done, that's the differentiation of Brinker.
Talk to me a little about this kind of automated misinformation threat management platform. And just to position Brinker, would you say you're more in the kind of new defense tech, AI, big data side, and software side, or more on the, let's say, AI, business intelligence, monitoring side?
I would say AI in defense, narrative risk, narrative defense, that would be it.
Narrative risk, narrative
and
defense,
narrative intelligence.
Narrative as narrative intelligence.
That would be the bucket thing that suits us the most.
I love this narrative intelligence vector or sector or industry. Narrative intelligence is something that really kind of folds into the whole national defense thinking.
Yeah. Misinformation, regardless of if you're working with a bank or major multinational or Department of Defense, anywhere, the soldiers fighting the war on misinformation are always analysts. So they would be threat intelligence analysts, they would be open source intelligence analysts. They are the ones trying to kind of find the needle in the haystack, making sense of the huge amount of data that you're seeing. So if you go to a very practical level, we want to make them super analysts.
I want to try and take the listener through a case study. You have a client, you're monitoring their narrative reputation, their narrative defense, And then you start to get a couple of signals and you start to see that certain patterns are emerging, certain themes or certain, I guess, it's methods are being used. Take us to how you start to see something and then how it might evolve before you say, okay, we should flag this.
What I would start seeing are narratives that are suspiciously similar, right? So people would talk about the same general narrative, maybe discuss an aggression of one country against another country. And it could be a complete fake. But we would start seeing discussions about aggression. Each would tell a different story, but we would recognize the similarity between them because we vectorize all of the data that comes in. So we are able to understand.
Vectorize. What is vectorize?
Vectorize is when everything that we look at in the real world has 2-3 dimensions, right? It has depth, size, color. AI looks at things differently. AI is a machine. They have to break it down to many more information points to understand what something is. So every narrative that comes in is being vectorized by AI.
It's sorted into something.
Everything is vectorized. And then based on that vectorization, based on that very nuanced understanding and abstract understanding of the content, the machine would sort out similarities. They would say, this story is similar to that story by 89%. That story is similar to that story by 71 or by 95. Now, everything that is beyond 90%, the machine would highlight.
Yeah.
Because we look at narrative as opposed to data points that are very clear, like when did the user join the platform, who are his friends, like very binary information, we can see those narratives as they spread across all of social media. So I can say, listen, there is a story on Facebook and it's 95% similar to a story on Telegram. So everything that has a high similarity level, we can arrange to fit them in one place. And the moment you'll see that, the similarities would emerge, because suddenly you would see that many of the users use the same image. Maybe some of them use the same story. And then you can see how it travels across time and across space. Yeah. And then if you see, for example, that on the 14th of December, there was a huge spike in that specific story, which suggests this is something that is coordinated. So already getting to this point where there is a very clear understanding, we've seen that happening. Here is something that looks like a coordinated attack at the very least. And when you investigate a few of the users to see where did they all originate, where did they come from, what have they talked about before, that investigation also happens automatically. And then you can start connecting the dots.
It's a puzzle.
It's a puzzle, but our idea is to make as much of the puzzle solving automatic. Mm-hmm. Because again, you wouldn't necessarily be able to take down, right? If Iran is doing a foreign influence campaign against Israel, you wouldn't take down Iran. But if you have an Excel file with all of the people in the network, with the clear evidence that they are all fake or promoting terror speech, then your ability to take it down is much better.
How often would you say that these kinds of influence operations are detected and then taken down? Like what percent?
All day, every day.
The good guys are fighting back and it's going okay.
No, I think that the good guys have started fighting back because of few things. First of all, the advent of AI. It made it easier for malicious actors to attack us, but it made it easier for us to find it. When the World Economic Forum says something like disinformation is the biggest risk factor, then automatically entrepreneurs in Israel and all across the world are all trying to find a solution. So we have one solution, which keeps evolving. The understanding of governments that they have to tackle it. Again, if just from a military perspective, we are doing fairly good on all fronts, but we are bitterly losing on the influence front. Bitterly losing. That's a disgrace.
Yeah, we got lynched. We got lynched online.
We still are. It can come from lack of information. It can come from many different places, but the disinformation, that's like the 10% that causes all of the problem. But the misinformation is by people who have a very deep belief that the narrative they are pushing for or pushing to correct is a moral one. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. And you have to understand that if you look at those people and say, they're idiots, they're anti-Semitic, blah, blah, blah. All right, some of them are anti-Semitic, but you have to understand the problem in all of its complexity. To understand, map out, quantify the narrative, that's step one. And doing it fast makes a world of difference in your ability to actually tackle it.
But it's not getting to our phones. If I get sent a WhatsApp from a friend who says, oh, look at the story, I mean, I can see that it's misinformation, but it's too late. That person was already formed that idea. Then I have to write to them that, no, I think there's another side to this. How do we do this quicker?
We have a mitigation called counter-narrative. We tell our clients, you can't come to an angry mob with the facts. That's useless. It's one thing to try and tackle the malicious actor through a cease and desist letter, for example. But the other thing to do is enter the conversation, but be smart about the way you're doing it by acknowledging the psychological forces at play. If somebody is currently very extremist, somebody is convinced that Israel is Satan, I think it might be a waste of time to tackle them. But remember that social media really amplifies the people who are vocal to begin with. But there are many other people who look into those discussions and they form their opinion while looking at those discussions. So having a say within the discussion, that's a meaningful way to curb the impact. Not necessarily the malicious actor, but to curb the impact. If you can do that at scale as well.
So let's say the first part of your service is detection. Then you bring that file to the customer and you say, look, this is what's happening. These are in an order of priority. This one is really, really important. This one's less. And here are a few things you can do about it. A cease and desist letter. Here is something else you can do. And by the way, here's a counter narrative you can deploy.
That's doable in the system right now.
How does that work? That's then considered the truth, not misinformation, counter narrative?
From where I'm standing, it's all about taking away the exclamation mark.
How do you mean?
Taking the Israeli example, right? Because it's easy and because it's actually something that we deal with every day.
Israel's committing genocide in Gaza.
Or on the other end, Israel is a saint. The exclamation point, I want to take a sentence that is declarative and turn it into a sentence that is just a sentence and maybe a sentence that ends with a question mark. We want to take away the extremism from the discussion. I think that's a worthy effort. I think that can make a change because, again, when everybody is saying something, you don't mind shouting it. But if there is a general opinion or something that people are debating about, your ability to shout about it or to go to a protest about it would be much lessened. What I'm trying to do is kind of putting into those debates doubts. Let's say that I put a tag there saying that, listen, from everything we know, this looks like a foreign influence campaign. And that's it. Even that would change the entire conversation for you as somebody just reading the dialogue in order to form an opinion.
I like that. As a former journalist, this idea that you can be sure of yourself at all times is something that I'm very, very uncomfortable with. People who put exclamation points, exclamation marks, after what they say, to me seems, okay, you're not leaving any room for doubt.
And so that's what, again, the counter narrative, the way we understand it, is to take down the exclamation mark. And I think if we're able to do that, that would be meaningful and huge. But technology allows us to do that in scale and fast. Again, misinformation, that's a narrative war. Whatever people are saying about Israel, that's a story. And if misinformation is successful, it's because the story was well constructed. And if you want to tackle that story, you have to tackle it with a story that is constructed as well.
Blessed are the storytellers, for they shall inherit the earth.
I hope so.
Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you, Daniel. I learned a tremendous amount.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Dejargonizer. For more episodes and ways to connect with me, please visit dejargonizerpod.com. That's dejargonizerpod.com.